The camera shutter clicked one final time as Sarah Martinez captured the damning evidence water cascading from the HOA president's illegal second-story addition during the storm. She thought she was protecting her neighborhood. She had no idea. She'd just photographed the empire that controlled everyone's lives, or that within 48 hours, armed security would be stationed outside her door with eviction papers. The woman who spent 3 years documenting every violation, every lie, every cover-up was about to discover that some secrets are worth killing for Rand. Her perfect Suburban, the first violation, Sarah Martinez, photographed, was Mrs. Chen's mailbox. By exactly 3 degrees after the postal truck clipped it during Tuesday's delivery, Sarah had been walking her golden retriever, Copper, when she noticed the slight tilt that violated Section 4.7 of the Willowbrook Estates Community Guidelines. All mailboxes must maintain perfect vertical alignment. She raised her Canon EOS, adjusted the focus, and captured the evidence. Clicked the sound that would eventually unravel everything. That was 3 years ago. Now, at 6:47 a.m. on a rain-soaked Thursday morning, Sarah stood in her kitchen reviewing the previous day's violations. On her laptop, the spreadsheet contained 2,847 documented infractions across the SD12 homes in their pristine suburban development. Each entry included GPS coordinates, timestamps, photographic evidence, and the relevant bylaw citation. "Sarah, you missed breakfast." Again, her husband David called from the dining room, his voice carrying the familiar edge of frustration that had grown sharper over the past 18 months. "Just finishing the quarterly report," she replied, not looking up from the screen. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she barely noticed. The data was too compelling. David appeared in the doorway, still in his Navy suit, briefcase in hand. At 42, he was 2 years older than Sarah, but looked younger, the stress of her obsession hadn't carved lines around his eyes or turned his sandy hair prematurely gray. "The HOA meeting is tonight," he said carefully. "You're not planning to present the evidence." "Of course I am." Sarah finally looked up, her green eyes bright with purpose. "Do you know that President Hawthorne has 17 violations on his property alone?" 17, David. His fence exceeds the height limit by 4 inches. His garden gnomes violate the decorative restriction policy. And don't get me started on the unauthorized deck expansion. David's shoulders sagged. "Sarah, please. The neighbors are starting to, what? Care about the rules they agreed to follow when they bought their homes." She stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I'm the only one holding this community to its standards. You're the only one who cares about a crooked mailbox from 3 years ago." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. That crooked mailbox was the beginning. Mrs. Chen fixed it within a week because someone cared enough to point it out. Property values stayed high because someone maintained standards. David checked his watch. "I have to go, just ... Try to remember that we have to live here." With these people, he kissed her cheek, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like an apology than affection, and left. Sarah heard his car pull out of the driveway, the sound fading into the morning chorus of lawn mowers and leaf blowers that kept Willowbrook Estates looking like a magazine spread. She returned to her laptop, scrolling through the latest batch of photos. A plastic flamingo in the Henderson yard violation of Section 12.3, paint peeling on the Nakamura fence, Section 8.1. The Johnsons' basketball hoop positioned 18 inches too close to the street, Section 15.4. Each violation was a small crack in the perfect facade, and Sarah had made it her mission to document every single one. Her phone buzzed, a text from her neighbor, Kelly Bradford. Board meeting moved to 7 p.m. Hawthorne called an emergency session. Sarah frowned. The monthly meetings were always held at 7:30 p.m. on the second Thursday. She'd been attending religiously for 3 years. Armed with her violation reports and a thick folder of photographic evidence, the board had grown increasingly hostile to her presentations, but she persisted. Someone had to. She spent the day preparing her materials, printing photos, organizing her notes. By 6:45 p.m., she was walking across the community center parking lot, her weathered leather messenger bag slung over her shoulder, camera around her neck out of habit. The community center was buzzing with unusual activity. Instead of the typical 15 attendees, Nearly 40 residents had gathered in the main hall. Sarah recognized most faces: the Kellys from Pine Street, the Rodriguezes from Oak Avenue, the elderly Steinbergs who lived 2 blocks over. At the front of the room, President James Hawthorne stood behind a podium that hadn't been there for previous meetings. At 58, Hawthorne was an imposing figure, 6 feet tall, silver-haired, with a kind of authoritative presence that commanded attention. He'd been HOA president for 8 years, running unopposed in every election. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Hawthorne began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "We have several important matters to discuss tonight, including a significant policy change that will affect how we handle community oversight." Sarah took her usual seat in the 3rd row, center aisle, and began setting up her materials. She noticed several residents glancing in her direction, their expressions unreadable. "First," Hawthorne continued, "I want to address the issue of harassment that has been plaguing our community." Sarah's head snapped up. "Harassment? For the past 3 years, we've received numerous complaints about a resident who's been conducting unauthorized surveillance of private properties, trespassing on lawns to photograph alleged violations, and creating a hostile environment. For families who simply want to enjoy their homes, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning." Sarah felt her cheeks burning. "While we appreciate community involvement," Hawthorne said, his eyes finding Sarah's, "we cannot tolerate behavior that crosses the line from civic engagement to stalking." "That's not—" Sarah started to stand, but Hawthorne raised his hand. "Please hold all comments until the end of the presentation." His tone was cordial but firm. "Now, the board has voted unanimously to implement new policies regarding community oversight." Sarah's heart began to race. A unanimous vote? When had they voted? She attended every meeting, read every announcement. "Effective immediately," Hawthorne announced, "all violation reports must be submitted through official channels only. No resident may photograph another resident's property without explicit written consent. Failure to comply will result in escalating penalties up to and including a ban from all community facilities and potential legal action." The room erupted in murmurs. Sarah stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she called out. "The community guidelines clearly state that maintaining standards is every resident's responsibility. I've been documenting actual violations of rules that everyone agreed to follow." "Mrs. Martinez," Hawthorne said, his voice taking on a sharper edge, "you've been warned repeatedly about your behavior. Tonight, we're implementing consequences." "What warnings?" "I've received no official warnings." Board member Patricia Vance, a thin woman with perfectly styled gray hair, stood up from her seat at the side table. "Sarah, we've tried to address this informally. Your enthusiasm ... has made several residents uncomfortable with following the rules they signed up for." Sarah's voice was rising, and she could feel the eyes of 40 neighbors on her. "I have documented evidence of violations that the board has ignored for months." "That's enough," Hawthorne said. "Mrs. Martinez, as of tonight, you are banned from photographing any property in this community. You are also banned from attending future board meetings until you can demonstrate that you understand appropriate community behavior." Sarah felt the floor seemed to shift beneath her feet. "You can't ban me from meetings. I'm a homeowner. I have rights." "You have the right to follow community guidelines," Hawthorne replied. "Guidelines that include respecting your neighbor's privacy and property." "What about your property, Mr. Hawthorne?" The words came out before Sarah could stop them. "What about your fence violation? Your unauthorized deck? Your security?" Hawthorne called out. 2 men in black uniforms appeared from the back of the room. Sarah had never seen security at a community meeting before. They approached her, positioned with professional calm. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to leave the premises," one of them said. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a kind of respectful firmness that suggested military training. "This is insane," Sarah said, but she was already gathering her materials. The room was dead silent now, 40 pairs of eyes watching her humiliation. "You can't silence me for documenting the truth," Hawthorne said as the security guards escorted her toward the door. "Is that this community has been patient with your behavior for far too long. That patience has reached its limit." Through the community center windows, she could see the meeting continuing without her. Residents were nodding, some EV. Sarah didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table until 3 a.m., analyzing every photograph she'd taken of James Hawthorne's property over the past 3 years. The anonymous threat had lit a fire under her obsession, transforming it from community service into something that felt like survival. By dawn, she had compiled a comprehensive file on the HOA president. 17 violations, as she'd told David, but that was just the beginning. The more she studied the photos, the more inconsistencies emerged. The unauthorized deck expansion wasn't just 4 feet too wide, it was built over what should have been a utility easement. The fence didn't just exceed height limits, it was positioned 3 feet into what property records showed belonged to the city, and the landscaping violations weren't just about aesthetics. They included drainage modifications that could affect the entire neighborhood's water management system. But it was the timestamps that made her blood run cold. Every single violation on Hawthorne's property had been completed during periods when the HOA board had voted to suspend inspections. The deck was built during the winter construction moratorium of 2022. The fence went up during the community beautification pause of 2023. The drainage modifications happened during last summer's inspection hiatus for resident privacy. Sarah pulled up the board meeting minutes on her laptop. Every suspension had been voted on unanimously, with minimal discussion and no public input. The same board that had just banned her from meetings for documenting violations had systematically created windows of opportunity for their president to violate every rule in the book. Her phone rang at 7:15 a.m., David's number. "Sarah, what the hell did you do?" His voice was strained, barely controlled. "What do you mean? Check outside now." Sarah walked to her front window and pulled back the curtain. A white van was parked across the street, Pinnacle Security Services emblazoned on the side. 2 men in black uniforms sat in the front seats, both looking directly at her house. "They've been there since I left for work," David said. "The neighbors are asking questions. Mrs. Chen called to see if we were okay." "Sarah, this is insane." "This is intimidation," Sarah corrected, taking photos of the van through the window. "They're trying to scare me into backing down." "Maybe you should back down. Maybe this has gone far enough." Sarah felt a familiar surge of frustration. "David, I found something real evidence of corruption. Hawthorne has been systematically violating community guidelines while his board creates cover for him. This isn't about mailboxes anymore. It never was about mailboxes. It was about you needing to control something, anything. Because what?" Her voice was sharp. A long pause. "Because you lost control of everything else." The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the miscarriage 2 years ago. The failed IVF attempts, the slow dissolution of their marriage, as she threw herself into community activism instead of dealing with their grief. "That's not what this is about," she said quietly. "Isn't it? Sarah, you've spent 3 years documenting every imperfection in this neighborhood instead of facing the imperfections in our—" "I have to go," she interrupted. "I'm meeting with a lawyer." "You're what? If they want to play legal games?" "I'll play legal games, but I'm not backing down." She hung up before David could respond. The lawyer's office was a modest storefront in the strip mall 15 minutes from Willowbrook Estates. Margaret Chen, no relation to the Mrs. Chen with the crooked mailbox, was a family law attorney who'd handled Sarah's real estate closing 3 years ago. She wasn't exactly a constitutional expert, but she was affordable and available. "HOA disputes are tricky," Margaret said, reviewing Sarah's documentation. At 55, she was a small woman with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made her look more like a librarian than a lawyer. "They have broad authority to regulate community behavior. But they can't ban me from meetings, right? I'm a homeowner." "Actually, they can. If they can demonstrate that your behavior is disruptive to community operations." Margaret flipped. "Through the photographs, you've been very thorough. I've been documenting violations." "That's not illegal." "No, but photographing people's private property without consent can be considered harassment, especially if you're doing it systematically over years." Sarah felt her stomach sink. "So they can just silence me. They can regulate your behavior within the community guidelines, but—" Margaret paused, studying one of the photos more carefully. "This is interesting. You said this deck was built during a construction moratorium." "Yes, the board voted to suspend all inspections for the winter, but construction permits are issued by the city, not the HOA. And this type of expansion would require permits. Margaret reached for her phone. "I have a contact in the city planning department. Let me make a call." While Margaret worked her connections, Sarah sat in the waiting room, checking her phone every few minutes. The security van was still parked outside her house, according to the neighbor who'd started texting her updates. The messages were getting more concerned. Kelly Bradford. "Sarah, people are starting to talk. What's going on?" Tom Rodriguez. "Hey, saw the security at your place? Everything okay?" Mrs. Chen. "Dear, I'm worried about you. Call me if you need anything." The neighborhood grapevine was buzzing, and Sarah realized that Hawthorne's intimidation tactics were backfiring. Instead of making her look like a troublemaker, the obvious surveillance was making her look like a victim. Margaret returned with news that changed everything. "Your instincts were right," she said, settling behind her desk with a satisfied expression. "James Hawthorne never pulled permits for that deck expansion, or the fence modifications, or the drainage work. So he's in violation of city ordinances. He's in violation of multiple city ordinances, building codes, and zoning regulations. The deck expansion alone carries fines of up to $50,000. But here's the really interesting part. My contact ran a broader search on your neighborhood." Margaret pulled out a printed report. "Willowbrook Estates has had an unusually high number of permit violations over the past 5 years. 47 unpermitted construction projects, all in homes belonging to HOA board members or their immediate family members." Sarah felt the pieces clicking together. They're using the HOA to cover for illegal construction. It gets better. The city planning department has been trying to investigate these violations for 2 years, but they keep getting stonewalled. Every time they schedule an inspection, the HOA claims it's harassment and threatens legal action. "Who's their lawyer?" Margaret checked the report. "Pinnacle Legal Services, same company that owns Pinnacle Security Services." The white van outside Sarah's house suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't just about HOA violations. It was about a coordinated system of corruption that involved legal intimidation, private security, and systematic violation of city ordinances. "We need to take this to the city," Sarah said. "We need to be very careful," Margaret corrected. "These people have lawyers, security, and apparently 3 years of practice silencing opposition. But you're right, this is bigger than an HOA dispute." Sarah's phone rang, unknown number. "Mrs. Martinez." The voice was professional, female. "This is Detective Lisa Park with the County Fraud Investigation Unit. I understand you've been documenting irregularities in your homeowners association. I'd like to meet with you this afternoon." Sarah's heart jumped. "How did you... Let's just say that certain city departments have been waiting for someone like you to come forward. Are you available at 2 p.m.? After hanging up, Sarah stared at Margaret in amazement. "The police want to meet with me." "The County Fraud Unit," Margaret corrected. "That's not routine police work. That's white-collar crime investigation." "What does that mean?" "It means your HOA president isn't just violating building codes. He's probably stealing money, committing fraud, or both." Margaret gathered Sarah's documents, "and it means you're about to become a key witness in a criminal investigation." Sarah drove home in a daze, her mind racing through the implications. The security van was still parked outside her house, but now it looked less like intimidation and more like evidence. She photographed it from multiple angles, noting the license plate and the faces of the 2 men inside. As she pulled into her driveway, her phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Last warning, stop digging or face the consequences." But this time, instead of fear, Sarah felt a surge of vindication. She wasn't just an obsessive neighbor documenting trivial violations anymore. She was a whistleblower who had uncovered a criminal conspiracy. She forwarded the threatening text to Detective Park and added it to her evidence file. Then she sat down at her computer and began organizing 3 years of documentation into a comprehensive report. By the time she met with Detective Park at 2 p.m., Sarah had compiled a 200-page dossier that would serve as the foundation for the largest municipal corruption investigation in the county's history. The detective was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who took notes rapidly as Sarah presented her findings. When Sarah finished, Detective Park leaned back in her chair with an expression of professional admiration. "Mrs. Martinez, handed us the most detailed documentation of municipal corruption I've seen in 15 years of fraud investigation. This goes way beyond HOA. Sarah was at her kitchen table, organizing evidence files by the light of her laptop screen, when every light in the house died simultaneously. Not the gradual dimming of a blown fuse, the instant darkness of a severed connection. She grabbed her phone's flashlight and checked the breaker box. Every switch was in the correct position. Through the window, she could see that the rest of the neighborhood still had power. Only her house sat in deliberate darkness. Her phone buzzed. David's number. "Sarah, I'm coming home now. Where are you?" "At Jake's." "We were watching the game when I got a call from some guy claiming to be with the electric company. He said there was a safety issue at our address and they had to cut power for emergency repairs. At midnight, that's what I said. Sarah, get out of the house. Go to the Chens or the Bradfords. This isn't about power lines." Sarah was already grabbing her laptop and camera bags. "I'm not running from my own home." "Yes, you are. Because I just drove past our street and counted 6 security vans." "6, Sarah. That's not intimidation anymore, that's a siege." The line went dead. Sarah tried calling back, but her phone showed no signal. Cell towers could be jammed, she knew, but that required sophisticated equipment and coordination. Amateur harassment had just escalated to professional-level intimidation. She stuffed her evidence files into a waterproof document bag and headed for the back door. The security vans David had seen were probably positioned to watch the front of the house, but her backyard bordered the Nakamura's property, and their side gate led to Pine Street. The night air was cool and humid, carrying the scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass. Sarah moved carefully through her garden, using her phone's dim light to navigate between the rose bushes and the vegetable patch David had insisted on planting. Last spring, she was halfway to the back fence when she heard voices, double quotes, ... northeast corner of the property. Make sure she can't get to the neighbors. Copy that. What about the husband? He's contained. Vehicle disabled, 3 blocks out. Sarah's blood turned to ice. David wasn't coming home. They had stopped him first. She crouched behind the garden shed, trying to control her breathing as footsteps moved through the yard. A flashlight beam swept across the lawn, missing her by inches. Sarah pressed herself against the shed wall, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure they'd hear it. No sign of the target in the backyard, the voice reported. Proceeding to entry point. Entry point. They were planning to break into her house. Sarah waited until the footsteps moved away, then sprinted for the back fence. The Nakamura's gate was locked, but she'd helped Mrs. Nakamura with her garden enough times to know about the loose board in the fence panel. She squeezed through the gap and found herself in their backyard. The Nakamura house was dark, but she could see the faint glow of a television in the living room. She approached the back door carefully and knocked 3 soft taps, then waited. Mr. Nakamura answered, a slight man in his 70s, wearing pajamas and a confused expression. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "I need to use your phone," she whispered. "And I need you to call the police. There are men breaking into my house." Mr. Nakamura's confusion turned to alarm. He gestured her inside and handed her his cordless phone. "Should I turn on the lights?" "No lights. They're watching for me." Sarah dialed Detective Park's number from memory. The detective answered. On the second ring, her voice alert despite the late hour. "Detective Park, this is Sarah Martinez. They're at my house, armed men, multiple vehicles. They cut my power and jammed my cell service. Are you safe?" "I'm at my neighbor's house. They have my husband two-stuffed his car somewhere. I'm dispatching units now. Stay where you are, keep the lights off, and don't let anyone in except police officers with proper identification." Through the Nakamura's front window, Sarah could see her house across the street. Dark figures moved around the perimeter, their flashlights creating moving patterns of light and shadow. One man was doing something to her front door, picking the lock or installing surveillance equipment. "This is happening too fast," Detective Park said. "We weren't expecting them to move this aggressively." "What do you mean? We've been monitoring communications since you came in this afternoon. There's been a lot of chatter about containing the situation and protecting the operation, but nothing this immediate." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. They know about the investigation. "That's what I'm afraid of. Sarah, I need you to tell me exactly who knew about our meeting today." Sarah ran through the short list. You, me, Margaret, Chenmai, lawyer and, whoever she called at city planning. Anyone else? David, I told my husband I was meeting with a lawyer, but I didn't mention you specifically. Who else might David have told? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah thought about her husband's increasing frustration with her activities, his pleas for her to back down, his suggestion that she was using community activism to avoid dealing with personal issues. I don't know, she said quietly. Sarah, I need you to consider the possibility that someone close to you has been feeding information to the people you've been investigating. Before Sarah could respond, the front door of her house opened, not forced opened with a key. Sarah watched in horror as 3 men entered her home, their movements efficient and practiced. They have a key, she whispered to Detective Park. That's not possible unless the detective's voice cut off. Unless what? Unless someone with legitimate access gave it to them. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. David had a key, obviously, but so did her sister in Phoenix for emergencies. And the HOA management company had keys to all properties for maintenance access. And David's brother Jake, who'd house sat for them last summer. Detective, how long until the police arrive? 10 minutes, maybe 15. Too long. Sarah could see the men in her house moving systematically through the rooms, searching for something specific. One of them was in her kitchen, right where she'd been working on the evidence files. They're looking for my documentation, she realized. Did you remove it? Most of it. But there are backup files on my computer, and Sarah's heart sank. The original photographs are still on my camera's memory card. In the house, Sarah. Those photographs are evidence in a criminal investigation. Without them, the case falls apart. Not falls apart, but it becomes much harder to prosecute. Your testimony is valuable, but physical evidence is irreplaceable. Sarah watched the men continue their search and felt something shift inside her. For 3 years, she'd been documenting violations because she believed in following rules and maintaining standards. Now she was watching criminals destroy evidence that could expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of local government. I'm going back, she said. Absolutely not. Sarah, these people have demonstrated they're willing to use violence. They're in my house, going through my things, destroying evidence of their crimes. I spent 3 years documenting every violation, every lie, every cover-up. I'm not letting them erase that work. The police will be there in 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, they'll be gone. Along with every piece of evidence I've collected. Sarah handed the phone to Mr. Nakamura. Tell the detective I'll be careful. Sarah, no. Detective Park's voice carried through the phone as Sarah headed for the back door. But she was already moving, slipping back through the loose fence board and into her own yard. The men had posted a guard at the back door, but he was focused on the alley behind the house, not the interior of the yard. Sarah knew her own property better than anyone. She'd photographed every square inch of it, documented every plant, every measurement, every angle. She moved through the shadows like a ghost, using the garden shed and the oak tree to stay hidden. The basement window was her target, the one David had been meaning to fix for months. The latch was broken, and she could access it through the window, well without being seen from the main floor. She slipped inside and found herself in the basement storage room. Above her, she could hear the men moving through the house. There. Voices muffled but urgent. Check the computer again. Look for cloud storage, backup drives, anything. She's got 3 years of photos here. This is going to take hours to delete. We don't have hours. The husband broke free. He's probably called the cops by now. Sarah smiled grimly. David had escaped whatever they'd done to him. Her phone was still jammed, but she could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer. She crept up the basement stairs, staying low. The men were in the kitchen, clustered around her laptop. One of them was downloading something to a portable. Dr. Wall, another, was sorting through her printed photographs. Boss wants all of it destroyed, the third man said. Documents, photos, computer files, everything. What about the memory cards? Especially the memory cards. She's got 3 years of surveillance photos on those things. Sarah's camera bag was on the kitchen counter, less than 10 feet away. The men were focused on the laptop, their backs to the hallway. She could get close enough to grab the bag and retreat to the basement before they noticed. The sirens were getting closer. Police cars, multiple units, approaching fast. Time to go, one of the men said. Torch the documents, and let's move. Sarah watched in horror as one of them pulled out a small container of liquid.